There it is. Welcome to El Paso Bible Church. This is our Sunday school hour. If you're looking for Revelation, you missed it. We're finished with Revelation. We're doing Exodus now, and we're in Exodus chapter 2. And last week, as a reminder, this is a familiar story to many of you, but last week we talked about the process that God was using to take a family that was a large family, right? It was about 70 people that came into Egypt. Remember, God was preserving them from a famine in the land that they had been promised. And taking those 70 people and turning them into a nation over 400 years. And in that process, we noted that there was a dynastic transition, a transition in the kingly line in Egypt to a king that had no idea the role that Joseph had played in not only preserving his own family, but saving the entire nation of Egypt from starvation. I mean, we could go back and talk about the visions that Joseph had that brought him to the second position in Egypt and caused him to store up food so that the nation of Egypt was in fact blessed by his presence and by his wisdom. But that's for another time. So that's how they got there. God was preserving them from starvation, but he was using that time period in order to take a relatively normal-sized family for the era and making it into a nation. It comes with its own problems, and we talked about this, that as people get comfortable, that's why they went. It was more comfortable to eat than to starve, right, in Egypt. But their life was pretty good in Egypt. And so they were not really just inclined to leave on their own. They were not inclined to leave the prosperity. They were not inclined to leave the place where their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, going back 400 years, had lived and called home. They lived in that delta, that area of Egypt called Goshen. They had their own area in which to live, in which they had sovereignty to a great measure. And so we see that as we observe that the Lord is bringing them trials through, or allowing them to experience trials, let's say that, in order to prepare them to be ready to leave the land when the land is ready to receive them. And so part of that is that the new king that doesn't know that Joseph saved Egypt begins to persecute the Hebrews. He at first makes them work their hands to the bone and tries to destroy them that way. Then he goes for a massive infanticide, killing of the babies, the male babies, particularly there among the Hebrews, which, by the way, didn't work simply because the midwives among the Hebrews refused to do that. They refused to put the male children to death, which was itself a potential death sentence. But God prospered. The last few verses of chapter 1, God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. Because the midwives feared God, he established households, or established heritages for them. And so that's where we are. Right, we are in this story, and it is these circumstances which bring about this familiar story. So the last verse, Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive." We could bring this, and we will to some degree, to talk about the way that lives are valued in our culture today. And that will come up, but it is not wrong when your government devalues human life to reject their directives. And we often will make the patriots among us, the patriotic Americans among us will say, well, our government doesn't make anybody get an abortion. And that may be true. But what society does, what culture does, what governments do is they understand that they can't shock you into it. They can't tell you one day that we're going to only allow these children to be born to you. We have the technology now to perfect humanity, and we don't need to have imperfect humanity. They realize that that's a process. And so they acclimate and desensitize us to it before it becomes a mandate. And it is a mandate now in certain parts of the world. And it is not wrong to reject those things, even if people misapply Romans 13 out the nose. Did you get out the nose there, Felicia? I'm sorry. Okay, she got out the nose. All right. Chapter 2, the birth of Moses. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. Now, that's significant, right? There's no priestly class yet because Moses has not been born yet. The law of Moses doesn't exist yet. The dispensation of the law doesn't exist yet. But when we hear the word Levi, what do we think? Anybody? You think nothing. It's okay. You think, what's that? Levites, which among the Levites we have what became the Levitical priesthood, specifically the Zadokite at some point priesthood in the lineage of the priests. And Moses functions in this way, right? His brother Aaron, in fact, becomes the first of the priestly line, and he and his sons. But prior to that, Moses functions as that intermediary between what God says and what he wants done and the people that he wants to do it. And so he functions as a priest. He is coming from this priestly line. They're not named here, Moses' parents. It just said there was a Levite, and he married I don't know what the feminine is here, a daughter of Levi, a woman from the house of Levi. We find out actually later in Exodus that this is his aunt, technically. The interesting relationships take place here, different expectations. It's not something that we would probably normalize, but remember that people are living quite a long time. I myself have an uncle that is only 8 years older than I am. I know people with aunts and uncles that are younger than they are. It's probably less weird than it sounds. But he marries this daughter of Levi. Verse 2 says, the woman conceived and bore a son, which is normally a cause for celebration in the Near East. We find out, of course, also that Moses has a younger brother, sister, an older sister. It was a cause of celebration because families were patrilineal. They were also patriarchal. That means that the line comes through the father, and it was important for inheritance reasons to have a son, so they would normally be celebrating this. But they'll be celebrating some other things. When she saw that he was tov, that he was beautiful, is what my translation says. I don't think that's quite correct. She saw that he was good. She hid him for 3 months. The word tov means a lot of different things. It's kind of it's like how we would say good, right? We would say that thing is good. Those grapes are good, meaning they haven't fermented. We would say, I'm good. Like my boy's friend Gavin. All that meant was that he was not in pain. It didn't mean that he was doing stellarly. It didn't mean that he was doing awesome. It didn't mean that he was doing particularly well. It just meant that he was not dissatisfied or suffering. He was good. Tov, right? And I think in this environment, we have to be honest and assess that the Levite woman here is looking at the baby and saying, is this baby going to die? Is this a healthy baby? Because she's potentially putting her whole family at risk of execution for preserving his life. And that's not something that we want to consider, but it was something that I think played into through her decision. That's one thing about the Bible that we have to appreciate. The Bible tells us when a dude marries his aunt. Right? Does that mean it's reliable? They don't try to smooth over that. The Bible tells us that Pharaoh did horrible things. The Bible tells us that the midwives rejected it. The Bible tells us all of the things that they did, whether they are good, bad, or ugly. The Bible also doesn't say you should follow in their footsteps, right? There's very few times where the Bible actually says this is a prescription. You should do what that person did in these circumstances. So she hides him for 3 months. I wonder how well that went. Exactly. I mean, they're in Goshen. They're in their environment where everybody is functionally the same. The society, the subculture, has largely rejected Pharaoh's decree. But she hid him for 3 months. There's a church here locally. We're not it. It's not us. We're not the hypothetical, but they really want you to put your child in child care during the service. They really do not want any distractions. Is that what you call your kids? Hi, little distraction number 1. Hi, little distraction number 2. Don't view your kids as distractions. This is why we don't do that. Because our children are not the distraction. They're one of our primary purposes. Despite sometimes how we feel about them. Right, Tim? All right, sometimes we feel differently, but we have separated at El Paso Bible Church. Our men's ministry has made a commitment, right, to separate how we think about something and how we feel about it, and we're not going to go down the road of confusing the two. How easy is it to hide a baby that is 2 months old? Anybody? Anybody walk out in the dead of night? I had 2 of them at one time. I had very nice forearms when I was 23 or 24 because I had to swing Gideon and Micah in their carriers like so for hours on end. And then we would go out in the dark of night and drive them around for hours with the windows open while they were crying. We weren't hiding anything. People could guess exactly what was going on. They could look at the bloodshot eyes and see what we were doing. Pretty talented to be able to hide an infant, especially with other children in the house. She hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it with tar and pitch. And then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. So this is always illustrated as if the basket is like shooting the rapids down the Nile. I don't think that's the picture. Just kind of floating there, right? In a steady part of the river among the reeds. That's the shallow part with little current. He's not, whitewater rafting here. Verse 4 says, his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. Looks a little bit odd. Have a basket floating. These baskets don't normally float. Are we agreed on that? They don't normally float. This was a special basket. When she opened it, and who knows whether she smelled the thing before she saw it, right? It doesn't take very long for that to be an issue with an infant of 3 months old. She saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Well, I don't know. I always wondered about this when I was a kid. How did she know? But it was a Hebrew kid. Anybody? What? Okay. Might be more basic than that. There you go. People think about the law of Moses and as circumcision, but circumcision was the sign of the Abrahamic covenant. Abraham and his sons were given the sign of circumcision. It'd take about 2 seconds, because I guarantee you that diaper was messy already. Whatever they passed for a diaper in ancient Egypt, I don't know. But she would have known right away that it was a Hebrew child. In fact, later on in Exodus, I trust you remember the words of my friend Sean, who will be here in June to fill in the pulpit for me. He says, keep the Bible weird. Is that okay with you? We keep the Bible weird. The Bible is weird. It relates abnormal, supernatural things that don't happen. And that's why when we deal with people's objections and they go, well, fish don't swallow people, when we read the book of Jonah, we know. We know it doesn't happen all the time. It happened once because it was supernatural. But we find out that God, in fact, as Moses is coming back from Midian with his wife, he has failed to circumcise his son as he's about to go and do the Lord's work in Egypt and lead the Jewish people out of Egypt, out of their captivity. It says that the Lord was striking him and going to take his life until his wife took charge and circumcised their son. It was an important sign of the covenant. It was already enacted, and it was something Moses had done for him, but he had failed to do for his son within the Jewish nation, within the Abrahamic covenant. So this is one of the Hebrews' children, plain as the nose on her face, as we say. So then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" This is a normal thing throughout aristocracy at minimum, to have a nursemaid for a child. This is a pretty quick-thinking little girl, though, isn't it? That she had this suggestion to make. I know some children like that. My daughter Grace administers many things on my behalf already. She's only 13. She tells me how things ought to be and what I ought to adjust in a lot of ways, and she's usually right. She's not the only one. Isaac tells me how I'm supposed to fix things, or the next step in fixing things, and I have no idea how he knows that, because he's never seen me fix whatever it is already. He just knows. The children are capable of making wise decisions. She was already trusted to have charge over observing her younger brother. And so she has a suggestion. I'd like to find a nursemaid for you. So Pharaoh's daughter said to her, verse 8, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him and got paid for it. Now, the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." And it's a play on words. Hebrew likes that. Because I don't know if any of you have ever studied Hebrew. I am currently kind of refreshing my knowledge of Hebrew. I am very familiar with a number of languages, and Hebrew is kind of different in that it seems to me, my Hebrew prof would probably have a fit, all of the ones over all the years that I've had in saying this, but it seems more like the written language is there so that you can remember the oral tradition. Because you have things like this. They have a written language, but Moshe was Mashah, right? It doesn't help you so much in reading. It actually gives you kind of a tongue twister when they have this consonance, where they have the words kind of a play on words. there. But in remembering it, right, that's kind of a bumper sticker, right? Moshe was Mashah. And you can remember the whole story, how Moshe was drawn out of the water by Pharaoh's daughter. And it's designed so that you can help find things easier and you can call the truth to your memory faster. But it is interesting that it's a play on words in the Hebrew language, and not Egyptian. She was named by Pharaoh's daughter, and she was Pharaoh's daughter's son, taken into the court, but he was named with a Hebrew name. She became her son, or he became her son, excuse me. No, we're not 2020 here. There are no she's becoming sons. We don't do that. Sorry, that was an unfortunate slip of the tongue there. He became her son. This is important. The Hebrew is a written language. In fact, many people, textual critics, when they come to the first 5 books of the law for many, many years, said that there was no way on earth, there was absolutely no way that Moses could have actually written the first 5 books of the Bible, because Hebrew was not a written language in his lifetime. So we have actually no other corroborating evidence that anybody was writing anything at Moses' time. And even though the Bible says, even Jesus says, we talked about this last week, Jesus quotes from Exodus and says, as Moses wrote, or as is written in the book of Moses. We have a language, a Semitic language called Ugaritic, very similar to Hebrew. In fact, you could probably write one if you knew the other. And they were writing receipts, like you get at Circle K when you buy a Coke or when you buy gas. It was in common usage. Everybody was literate enough to use it. And so Moses is going to be educated there in ways that he would not have been educated. If he had stayed in a Hebrew household at that time under that Pharaoh, the one thing that he would have learned, and it's a useful skill, would have been how to make bricks, how to be a mason. Anybody wish they knew how to stack block? I do. I don't want to do it all day, every day, but I would rather like to be able to stack a block straight up and down instead of like this or like this. And the Egyptians were famous for going this way. If I made a pyramid, it would probably go like this. It'd be upside down. That's the natural tendency. It's a useful skill. We don't denigrate that skill. But he needed to be of note in the court of Pharaoh. He needed to be known. He needed to be known as an educated man. He needed to be well spoken. So he was raised as her son, as the inheritor, the heir in the court of Pharaoh. Any more minutes? We got more minutes. Let's keep going. Verse 11 says this, now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up. What's grown up? People laugh when I say I have grown-up children because in this world it is not common to have people described as grown-ups at the age of 20. It's just not. People don't talk about people as grown-ups as being 20. If you're waiting to call your children grown-ups till they're 30, we have an issue. We have a problem there. So we don't know how exactly old he was. People have ways of describing, how things are as they're growing up here, right? So he has this. It came about in those days. Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren. Now remember, he's probably dressed like an Egyptian. He is acting like an Egyptian. He is an Egyptian for all intents and purposes, but it's not been hidden from him that the Hebrews are his brethren. So he goes out and he looks on their hard labors. He looks on how much they are working. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So what would you do in that situation? Somebody is beating on your brethren. I'll tell you what I told my sons. I told them early in their life, early on in their existence, that, if you see your brother taking a beating, you put a stop to it. I don't ask for you to make a judgment. I don't ask for you to make a discernment. I don't ask that you decide whether your brother deserved it or not. You stop it. We'll deal with whatever happened, but you stop it. So I don't think that he is making a wrong decision here, that he sees his brethren getting beaten by a Hebrew. So he looked this way and that. He was wondering whether he was making the right decision. He saw there was no one around. And he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So he feels apprehensive because of what he's about to do. We see this in aristocracies always. You don't hit a peer, right? In the English aristocracy, you don't do that. He struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, a shallow grave. He didn't just beat him, right? People, when they understand that we process our own animals in our own backyard, they ask us. They're like, "Well, you killed them?" I'm like, well, they kind of object to staying in the freezer, right? You don't bury somebody who is alive. He struck them down and he has buried them in the sand. So he has, exacerbated. He's escalated his response. He didn't just stop the beating. And he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" So he's already struck one down, buried the body, and he goes out and he sees 2 Hebrews fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" In other words, why are you fighting with each other? I just put a stop to physical violence between the Egyptians and you. He doesn't know what's going on. 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. Verse 14 says, "But he said, 'Who made you a prince or judge over us?'" Who put you in a position of authority, Moses? What would be your answer? Anybody? Who put Moses in a position of authority? This is like in a ordination exam. They always ask you this question: who killed Jesus? Always. They think they're trying to trip you up. And if you can't name 3 or 4 guilty parties, you've answered wrongly. I'm just asking you, what would be your answer? Who put Moses in a position of authority? What's that? Pharaoh's daughter would be one correct answer. God, that's a good answer. That's probably the best answer. Who put you in the princely position? How, as a circumcised Hebrew baby, did you end up adopted into Pharaoh's court as a son and heir? How did that happen? Now, whether Moses was aware of that or not, I don't know at this point. Because remember, he's been educated as an Egyptian. Who made you a prince or a judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Oops. I thought I took care of that problem. I thought I buried the evidence. They talk about that today, that you really you have no expectation of privacy anymore in our world. And normally the culprit is because everybody, well, I don't have my phone on me. Everybody has 4 different cameras on their phone. Everybody's got video. Everybody's, that was a problem even then. Somebody watched. Somebody knew. Very next day, right? Very next day, it had already gone all over Goshen. Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And he was afraid and said, surely the matter has become known. Is that a problem? For him personally? I don't know if you remember I'm going to probably not remember this well. There's a movie long time ago now called The Godfather, right? And the son comes and he's talking to his girlfriend at the time, and he's explaining what his family does, and she says, well, my family doesn't kill people. They're politicians. Well, my family doesn't kill people to get what they want. And he looks at her and says, now who's being naive, Kay? It happens, doesn't it? Does Moses have to be afraid of the normal repercussions for being a murderer? Probably not. He's a prince in the court of Egypt, in Pharaoh's court. Although it does say that Pharaoh does try to kill him. We don't know what would happen. Verse 15 says this, but when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses. Now we're not sure how that would have gone down. Pharaoh may have succeeded. His daughter may have interceded for him. But Moses flees. We're off to a real rough start to leading the nation of Israel, aren't we? Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. In the ancient Near East, sitting down by a well was the closest thing to finding a payphone, basically. It's where everybody had to go. Everybody had to get water in that area from a well. Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian. That would be, Midian, you kind of get the picture of it being a wilderness. From reading in Scripture, you read, anyone here, is Montana still this way? Is either Montana or Wyoming that still has more sheep than people? That's kind of Midian. That's normal, right? If you're a shepherd and you have more kids than you have in your flock, you're a bad shepherd, right? So you really, if you're a culture of shepherds, you intend to have large flocks. Otherwise, you're not successful. Well, that's where he is. So he has traded the court of Pharaoh, the education of Pharaoh, the wealth of Pharaoh. One fool decision affecting the next 40 years of his life. Let's commit to try not to make those kinds of decisions, guys. Young men especially. It is possible to direct the next 40 years of your life by one foolish decision. Can God redeem it? Yes. Will you be free from the consequences entirely? No. Can God still use you in your life for those 40 years? Yes. Yes. But anger and wrath and a temper are not good substitutes for wisdom. Moses fled. By the way, that's never going to solve your problems. Never. It's not courageous. The quickest way through a confrontation is to have it, not to flee from it, and to recover from it. Those are hard-bought lessons on Moses' part. I think that particularly any man that has lived on this earth long enough to be blessed with a few gray hairs would tell you young guys that that's true. Face the problem, don't run away from it. If it's inside of you, outside of you, or both. The priest of Midian, we have a couple more minutes and then we're going to end. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came to draw their water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. 7 daughters. You know how they said that in the ancient Near East? No? You ever watch Fiddler on the Roof? Man has 5 daughters? Something like that. 5 daughters? I have 1 daughter, 1 princess. There's only 1 throne in my family, and there's only 1 princess that sits on it. In our family, we have very few princesses. We have very few daughters that come to us. So we value them highly, but large part in the ancient Near East, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So the priest of Midian, it would have sounded humorous to people in his day that he is the priest of Midian. He is the intercessor between the people of Midian and God, and that he had 7 daughters. I didn't say that was all he had, but he had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. That's a lot of water. It wasn't like in Egypt where you could go down to the Nile and just water your flocks from the river. By the way, rivers normally have water in them. It's not like here in El Paso, where here it is almost summer, and we haven't, a little breeze blows up and blows most of the river downhill. The Nile had water in it all year round, and so did the Rio, until we dammed it up there at Elephant Butte. But this area is a wilderness, and they have a good well here, but they're filling water after water after water, a bucket to fill these troughs to water what we have to assume is a large flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. And Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. This is not the main application of this passage, you guys. But as somebody who carries a sidearm everywhere I go, this is something that I'm conscious of. That people sometimes need help from people that they don't know. In our culture, unfortunately, it's a disease. It's a kind of almost an addiction. That if you see 2 people going at it, the first reaction that they have is to whip out their video camera. Yeah? You could see somebody taking a licking that will put them on the ground, and a bunch of morons are standing around with their stupid phones so they can send it to the police later. Don't be that guy. That guy's useless. And we're pro-law enforcement at El Paso Bible Church. I'm pro-law enforcement personally, but even those of us who are the most pro-law enforcement realize that law enforcement comes to clean up the mess afterwards in those situations. Just a couple weeks ago, I think I mentioned this, that I was driving down I-10 and somebody stopped their car right at the entrance ramp, right before Trans Mountain, right after Artcraft. And a couple flew out of their vehicle in that very dangerous. People are going 100 miles an hour on the entrance ramp and next to the entrance ramp and started wailing on each other. I think I had Isaac and... Were you with me, Thaddeus? It was Grace. I had my 2 youngest children with me. And by the time I could get stopped, he had already decked the woman, laid her out on the side of the highway. And she had gotten up and took off in the car, and he took off down the road. I wasn't quick enough. But please don't show me on your phone the video you took of something like that. Men, especially, even young men, please don't do that. At the very least, show me where you called the police. Show me how you responded. There's way too many videos floating around of people devaluing human life by making all sorts of stupid comments on their own video. Oh, look at that. He just clocked that dude. He just laid that man out. It's not okay. We're out of minutes, guys. Any questions? I say we're out of minutes. We have 2 minutes for questions or comments about this passage. It is a familiar story to you, I think. Any questions or comments? Admonitions? Accusations of heresy? No? Come on, guys. All right. Oh, yes. Oh, no, there's definitely one queen. There's only one princess seat. Well, can we say that? Among the children. Yeah, there's one queen, certainly. But there's one princess seat, and she rules that seat with an iron pink fist. Right, boys? No. Absolutely not. Clara wants to know if I fire warning shots. That's illegal. I don't do illegal things. No. If the gun comes out of the holster, it's going to do more work than that. Please understand, it is illegal in Texas to fire warning shots. It's not just a matter of you can't find ammo and it's expensive. It's illegal to fire warning shots. You have just engaged in unjustified, deadly behavior and can be prosecuted for that, even if it does no harm. Do not fire warning shots. Are you supposed to fire warning shots, people? It's like a Class A misdemeanor. You'll never carry a gun again in your life. Don't do it. I don't do illegal things, and I don't suggest you do illegal things. All right. That's Pastor Josh, the Redneck Hour for you right there in 1 minute. All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the truth of the story of Moses, of the history of Moses, and your sovereign providence to bring about your plan in the lives of your covenant people so many years ago. And we thank you for it. We love you, and we look for your promises to us. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.